In the quiet corridors between what is seen and what is felt, there exists a threshold the human soul crosses only once. It is the moment before the undone instant suspended between heartbeat and oblivion. During the Middle Ages, when belief, fear, superstition, and faith intertwined like threads in an invisible tapestry, this threshold became almost palpable. The last hours of a condemned man were not simply a punishment. They were a ritual, a resonance, a trembling oscillation between the earthly realm and the mysterious dimension that awaited beyond the veil. The story of these final minutes does not belong to one man alone. It belongs to all who walked this path across centuries, those whose steps echoed on stone floors worn by countless fates, whose breath quivered against the cold air of confinement, whose thoughts stretched desperately toward memory, hope, or forgiveness. To understand such an ending, we must enter the heart of the prison cell, sit within its darkness, and listen with the inner ear rather than the physical one. The medieval cell was not merely a room. It was a womb of stone, a chamber designed to strip a man of every illusion, leaving only the bare essence of his spirit. Its walls were thick, coarse, and wet with the eternal moisture that seeped from the earth. The air smelled of rust, old straw, and the echo of human suffering. Here, days and nights lost their distinction, merging into a single shapeless continuum. A prisoner awaiting death lived in a time made of heavy breaths and whispered prayers. On this particular night, the last night the condemned man sat against the wall with his knees drawn to his chest. The dim flame of a faraway torch cast a trembling glow upon his face. The flickering light carved deep shadows under his eyes, accentuating the hollow spaces where hope had once lived. His hair was tangled, his hands bruised and raw from the iron restraints. But it was his gaze that held the most truth, a mixture of fear, exhaustion, and a faint acceptance that came not from courage but from inevitability. Outside the cell, the castle lay in silenced, one of those silences so profound that the soul feels it before the ears do. Every stone in the fortress seemed aware of what was to come. There was a particular heaviness that settled on the place whenever a life neared its end, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Even the torches in the corridor burned lower, their flames bending like bowed heads. The condemned man could feel it. The shift, the unspoken knowing, the invisible pull toward the unknown. He had dreamed of this moment countless times, imagining himself waking in terror, pleading for more time, begging the sky for mercy. Yet the truth was far quieter. When the final hour approached, a strange stillness wrapped itself around him, not freedom from fear but a softening of its edges, as if some unseen presence whispered to him that the journey he was about to take was not an ending but a transformation. He closed his eyes and allowed his thoughts to roam freely. At first, they darted wildly, faces of loved ones flashing before him, memories of childhood, moments of joy, mistakes he wished he could erase. But gradually, these images settled like dust, and something else rose within him, a sensation deep in the chest, warm and subtly vibrating. It was not courage, nor was it resignation. It was the faint awareness of his own soul, a glow he had never noticed before, pulsing gently as though preparing itself for departure. Unbeknownst to him, this inner light resonated through the cell, through the corridor, through the very air. Sensitive hearts might have felt it as a slight pressure, a shift in the atmosphere, a whisper of something sacred. For every ending, no matter how brutal or unjust, releases a frequency that is unmistakably spiritual. The soul knows it is nearing a doorway. Meanwhile, in another wing of the fortress, the guards received the order. Thick boots struck the ground in rhythmic echoes that carried down the stone corridors. These men were accustomed to death. They had seen it often enough to lose any illusion of its gentleness. Yet even they felt the peculiar tension that permeated the atmosphere. Death, especially ritualized death, carried a presence that could not be ignored. One guard, carrying a dim oil lamp, descended the narrow stairs leading to the dungeon. The flame cast long shadows against the wall's shadows that seemed to stretch, distort, and wriggle like living beings. He quickened his pace, muttering to himself that it was only the light playing tricks. But anyone attuned to the unseen would have recognized the truth. The shadows were responding to the energy accumulating around the condemned man. Light and darkness both react when a soul prepares to cross realms. At the far end of the corridor, another guard stood beside a heavy door, reinforced with iron studs. Beyond that door waited the priest, the spiritual intermediary between this world and the next. Unlike the guards, the priest felt no dread. He had been present at many final confessions, and each time he sensed the same powerful vibration, the thinning of the veil, the breath of the divine brushing against the mortal plane. The room in which he waited was lit with candles arranged in a semicircle around a wooden stool. Symbols of faith adorned the walls. It was a space designed not for fear, but for surrender, for realignment, for the final harmonization of the soul before it left the body. Inside the cell, the prisoner lifted his head when he heard the distant footsteps. The sound traveled through the corridor like a slow drum beat, vibrating through the stone floor and up into his bones. His breath hitched, a shiver both physical and spiritual ran through him. He understood without needing to be told. The moment had arrived. The footsteps grew nearer. The key turned in the lock, a loud metallic clank that seemed to shake the air around him. To an outsider it might have sounded like an ordinary mechanical action, but to him it was the sound of fate solidifying. The door creaked open. The guards stepped inside. The prisoner rose slowly, his legs stiff and trembling, not only from fear, but from the weight of the spiritual passage he unknowingly sensed. His chains rattled softly, a sound like distant bells tolling. One guard gestured silently. Words were unnecessary. Everything in the room communicated through energy alone. As the condemned stepped out of the cell, a faint breeze drifted through the corridor. Impossible, given there were no open windows or drafts in the dungeon. It caressed his skin with unexpected warmth. The sensation was gentle, almost compassionate. It was as though some benevolent force, unseen by the guards, had reached out to reassure him that he would not cross the threshold alone. The corridor stretched before him like a long stone throat. The torches lining the walls flickered as he passed, their flames bending subtly toward him, as if acknowledging his presence. Or perhaps it was his energy, pulling at them, his soul, expanding beyond the boundaries of flesh. As the moment of separation approached, the guards walked in silence, flanking him on both sides. Their boots echoed in steady rhythm, but the condemned heard another sound beneath it, a faint hum, like distant chanting, as if the universe itself were singing a low, mournful note. He could feel the vibration of it in the center of his chest, a resonance that matched the pulse of his soul. The deeper they walked into the corridor, the more he sensed an invisible shift and intensification of presence. It was as though unseen eyes were watching him, not with judgment but with solemn understanding. Spirits of the forgotten, echoes of the past, lingering energies bound to the walls, all observed, silently. And then, as they reached the door to the priest's chamber, the condemned man felt something extraordinary, a sudden, overwhelming calm. The door closed behind the guards with a low, echoing thud that seemed to settle into the very bones of the room. The condemned man stood motionless for a moment, taking in his new surroundings. Compared to the cold confinement of the cell, this chamber felt strangely alive, as though it vibrated with unseen forces. The warm light of dozens of candles flickered across the stone walls, creating halos that danced like restless spirits. The scent of incense, frankincense, perhaps mixed with myrrh, floated gently through the air, coating the space with a thin veil of sacred solemnity. At the center of the room sat a wooden stool, simple and unadorned. Directly across from it waited the priest, an elderly man wrapped in dark robes, whose face bore both the exhaustion of age and the serenity of deep faith. His eyes, half hidden beneath a hooded cowl, carried a kind of timeless compassion, one that had witnessed countless confessions, countless last breaths, countless souls trembling on the edge of eternity. The condemned man met the priest's gaze, and for the first time in hours perhaps, Daisy felt something akin to recognition. Not recognition of the priest himself, but of the energy that radiated from him. It was warm, steady, and unmistakably anchored in a realm beyond ordinary perception. The priest rose slowly, his movements deliberate and gentle, as though he feared disturbing the delicate balance of the moment. "Sit," the priest murmured, his voice a low, resonant whisper that carried an almost musical cadence. "You have come to the threshold, my son. Let your burdens rest here." The condemned swallowed hard, then stepped forward. His chains clinked softly as he lowered himself onto the stool. The wood was surprisingly warm, as though the countless souls who had sat there before him had left traces of their final heat. The priest settled himself across from him, folding his hands atop his knees in a posture of solemn readiness. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Silence stretched between them like a vast field of space full of potential, waiting to be filled with truth. The candles crackled faintly. The air hummed with a kind of anticipatory energy, as though the walls themselves leaned in to listen. Finally, the priest broke the silence. "Do you know why you are here?" The condemned nodded slowly. "Yes, for confession." His voice was hoarse, cracked, as if each word scraped against his throat. The priest inclined his head. "Not only to confess your deeds, sighed softly, but to release the weight your soul has carried. This moment is not for judgment. Judgment belongs to a higher realm. Here, we simply bring your spirit back into harmony, so that its journey may continue without chains heavier than these. He gestured lightly at the iron restraints around the man's wrists. The condemned looked down at them, watching the dim candlelight glint across the metal. Something deep within his chest stirred something beyond fear, a realization that these chains, heavy as they were merely physical. The true chains, the ones he had carried for years, were invisible and far more suffocating. "What if," he whispered, hesitant, "what if my soul is already lost?" The priest shook his head gently. "No soul is ever lost," he said. "Some wander, some falter, some bury themselves beneath layers of sorrow or anger, but the spark remains. Always, even in darkness, the soul remembers the light." The man closed his eyes. For a moment, he allowed that possibility, however fragile, to settle within him. The priest leaned forward. "Tell me," he said softly. "Speak freely. Let truth find its way. The universe listens when a soul speaks honestly at the edge of death." A tremor ran through the condemned man, not of fear, but of release. And then the words began to flow. He spoke of his childhood of fields, golden beneath the summer sun, of the steady warmth of his mother's hands, of the echo of laughter that belonged to a version of himself he could barely remember. He spoke of choices made too hastily, of anger that had burned like wildfire, of the moment that had sealed his fate. Each confession was like a stone lifted from his chest, leaving behind an ache, but also a small breath of relief. As he spoke, the room seemed to shift around him. The candles flickered in strange rhythms, responding to the vibrations of truth spilling into the air. The shadows on the walls grew deeper, richer, as though absorbing the sorrows he released. Even the temperature of the room fluctuated, settled a cooling when he recalled moments of fear, warming when he spoke of love or regret. The priest listened without interruption, his face calm, his eyes steady. He gave no judgment, no visible reaction, only presence. Deep, unwavering presence. And that, more than anything, allowed the condemned man his soul to open. At one point, his voice broke, and he pressed a wounded hand to his chest. "I don't fear death," he whispered through tears. "I fear being forgotten." The priest's gaze softened. "No soul is forgotten," he said. "Every life, no matter how brief or troubled, leaves an imprint on the fabric of existence. Your energy has touched this world. Your breath has shaped the air. Your footsteps have pressed into the earth. The universe remembers what the human mind forgets." The condemned man inhaled shakily, absorbing the words like water to a parched throat. "But," he murmured, "will I be punished after this?" "Punishment is a human invention," the priest replied. "The divine deals in alignment, not retribution. If your soul carries weight, it will be given opportunities to shed it. If it carries wounds, it will be offered paths to healing. What lies beyond this life is not punishment, it is transformation." The man blinked slowly, tears streaming freely now. Then, "Is there hope?" Always. That single word reverberated through him like a bell ringing across a valley. Hope, fragile, shimmering, improbable yet real. The priest placed a hand over the man's heart, just above the place where his breath trembled. The touch was warm, grounding, almost luminous. "Feel," the priest whispered. The condemned closed his eyes, and then it happened. He felt his own heartbeat not as a frantic pounding, but as a slow rhythmic pulse that seemed to synchronize with something far greater. It was as if his heart had become an instrument, playing a note that resonated with the entire room, with the earth beneath the castle, with the unseen realms above it. A subtle vibration rose through his chest, spread to his shoulders, down his arms, into his legs. He felt as though he were dissolving into light, though his body remained solid on the stool. A sudden warmth blossomed behind his closed eyes, a soft glow, as though a sun were rising inside his skull. He gasped. The priest kept his hand steady. "This is your soul," he murmured. "This is its true nature. Fear distorts it. Pain contracts it. But now, as you speak truth, it expands. It remembers." The man felt tears streaming, not from sorrow, but from awe. He had never felt his own spirit so clearly. It was not a metaphor. It was real sensation, unmistakable and profound. When he opened his eyes again, the room looked subtly different. Colors seemed deeper, shadows softer, the candlelight warmer. It was as though the world had shifted slightly, aligning itself to a finer frequency. The priest withdrew his hand. "You are ready," he said quietly. The condemned blinked, confused. "Ready. For what?" "For the final passage." A cold wave of understanding washed over him, but beneath it was the warm glow still pulsing in his chest. The priest rose and retrieved a small wooden cup, filled with water infused with sacred herbs. He offered it with both hands. "Drink," he said, "for purification of the body, though your spirit is already in movement." The man drank. The water was cool and tasted faintly of mint and earth. It slid down his throat like the first breath of dawn. The priest then traced a small symbol on his forehead, a blessing, a recognition of his soul's approaching journey. "From this moment," the priest said, "you do not walk alone. Forces you cannot see will accompany you. The veil between worlds has thinned. Listen, and you will feel them." The condemned felt a trembling in the air, as though invisible beings had drawn nearer, not threatening, simply present. The priest called to the guards. When they entered, the condemned man felt no panic, only stillness. Deep, resonant stillness. The priest stepped back, his eyes shining with a faint sorrow. "Go in peace," he whispered. "Your soul is already halfway to the next realm." The condemned rose slowly. His chains rattled, but their sound felt distant, insignificant. His heart vibrated with a quiet, glowing certainty he had never known before. The guards took their positions at his sides. The door opened, and as he stepped out of the chamber, the air of the corridor felt transformed as though filled with unseen light. He was no longer just a man walking toward death. He was a soul preparing to cross worlds. The torchlight trembled along the stone corridor, as if the flames themselves feared what was about to happen. Each flicker stretched shadows across the walls, shadows that seemed to breathe, to whisper, to sway like silent witnesses. And in the middle of that trembling light walked the condemned man, his wrist bound, his step steady yet delicate, as though each movement carried the weight of an entire lifetime. Even though his body was still surrounded by coldness, inside him, something warm was awakening, an inner pulse, a vibration rising from the deepest part of his soul. It was not fear. It was not despair. It was something ancient, something almost sacred. The awareness of the spirit's final awakening before separation. He could hear his heartbeat, slow and heavy, like the toll of a distant cathedral bell. But beneath that rhythm, there was another one, lighter, subtler, like the gentle beat of wings. He felt it. The closeness of the invisible, the universe, leaning in. As he stepped forward, each breath he took became a dialogue with his own essence. He began to notice how everything felt intensified, the roughness of the stone beneath his bare feet, the distant murmur of guards, trying in Falingtu, masked their unease, the faint scent of damp earth, and the tingling sensation around his skin, as if unseen hands were brushing against him. He wondered if this was what happened to everyone in their last moments, or if he was simply beginning to see the true fabric of reality, the texture of existence that most people never perceive until the veil begins to lift. The corridor opened into a wider hall. The moonlight seeped through a barred window, pouring onto the floor like liquid silver. He stopped for a moment, lifting his chin slightly so the cool radiance touched his eyelids. And when it did, he felt something extraordinary. Memory and energy merging, past and present folding together. In the moon's glow, he remembered the smell of the fields where he played as a child, the soft warmth of his mother's hands, the laughter of friends long gone, the feeling of running freely through the grass before life taught him about chains. He remembered love. He remembered mistakes. He remembered choices, some noble, some broken. But more than anything, he remembered being alive. For the first time since his sentence, tears rose to the surface, not of sorrow, but of recognition. Recognition that life had been a tapestry woven by his soul long before he ever took his first breath. Recognition that even the darkest chapters had carried some hidden thread of meaning. He whispered into the silence, not to the guards, not to the walls, but to the universe itself, "I am still here." The words echoed through him, soft yet powerful. A guard nudged him lightly. "Keep walking." He obeyed, but his spirit remained lingering in that moonbeam, as though it wanted to etch itself into the memory of the earth one last time. The path led downward. With every step, the air grew thicker, until it felt like walking through invisible currents of ancient energy. He could sense it rising from the stone centuries of forgotten footsteps, of fear, of courage, of acceptance. The prison was older than the kingdom itself, and the deeper he descended, the more he felt the walls humming with past lives. He wondered how many souls had walked this same descent, How many hearts had exploded with terror or calm in these very tunnels? He wondered how many had fought, begged, resisted, and how many, like him, had surrendered to something greater than themselves. The guard ahead unlocked the final iron gate. The sound of the metal echoed like a celestial gong. Beyond the bars lay the courtyard where the execution framework waited. A simple structure, unadorned, but its presence radiated an overwhelming stillness. Not cruelty, not violence, just stillness, like an ancient altar built for the inevitable. The night sky stretched above, vast and star-filled, and when the condemned man lifted his eyes, something shifted inside him. He felt the stars watching, not judging, not pitying, just witnessing, as if they recognized him, as if they remembered him, as if they were saying, "You return to us soon." They led him forward to a wooden bench, so his final statements could be recorded. But instead of speaking immediately, he placed his hands on the surface and closed his eyes. Listenev, not to the guards, not to the crackling torches, but to the inner voice that had been growing louder ever since he stepped into the moonlight. A whisper from his soul, "You are not ending, you are transforming." He inhaled deeply, and for a moment it felt like the entire universe inhaled with him. One of the guards cleared his throat. "Say what you must." He opened his eyes, but instead of looking at them, he gazed into the night. "My life," he began softly, "was not perfect. I made choices that darkened my path. But I also loved, I also dreamed, I also tried, and if the universe can hear me, I want it known that I do not leave this world with hatred in my heart." His voice grew steadier, infused with a strange serenity. "I leave with gratitude for the lessons, for the pain, for the beauty hidden in small moments. I leave with the hope that my spirit can rise lighter than it arrived." Silence. Even the guards didn't move, he continued, his tone deepening, resonating like a distant chant. "If the divine still walks with me, let my last breath be a seed of forgiveness, a seed of understanding, a seed of release." The air around him shifted as if responding, as if accepting. When they finally escorted him to the center of the courtyard, he felt an unfamiliar calm settle over him. The wood beneath his feet was cold, but inside he felt warm as though a fire had been lit in his chest. He wasn't alone. He could feel presences around him, not hewn, not physical soft currents of energy swirling gently at the edges of perception. Ancestors, perhaps guides, echoes of lives before and after. He felt them, he felt seen by them, and with each moment, the fear that once seemed destined to crush him had dissolved into something like surrender, not defeat, but acceptance. A sacred allowing. The executioner stepped forward, but the condemned man no longer focused on him. His consciousness was expanding outward, reaching into the night, into the stars, into the invisible space where thought becomes vibration. He whispered, more to the sky than to anyone present, "I am ready, not ready to die, but ready to return to the greater whole, ready to dissolve back into the tapestry of existence, ready to become light again." The final preparations took place around him, but he felt strangely removed from his own body. It was still there, still breathing, still trembling slightly, but he was rising above it, not in the physical sense, but in an energetic one. He could see his life behind him, like a river. He could feel every person he had ever loved, like sparks in the darkness. He could sense every mistake, not as a wound, but as a lesson carved into the soul. And then something extraordinary happened. He felt his spirit expand, not leaving, but expanding, as if his consciousness was stretching across both worlds, the physical and the unseen. The night wind brushed his face, and for a split second, he felt it not as air, but as a touch of the infinite. His eyes soft, his breath slowed, his heart aligned with a rhythm older than time. In that subtle instant, he understood something profound. Death was not approaching him. He was approaching truth. The truth of what he had always been beneath the skin, beneath the fears, beneath the mistakes. A spark of eternal energy, a traveler between lifetimes, a piece of the universe longing to return home. And with that awareness blooming inside him, glowing like a lantern held by unseen hands, the moment approached. The final moment. The threshold between worlds. Yet he no longer trembled. He no longer resisted. He stepped inward, into himself, into the quiet, into the light gathering behind his ribs. And in that sacred stillness, just as the world around him braced for the irreversible, he felt peace for the first time in his life. The night air thickened around him, as though the very atmosphere sensed the weight of what was about to unfold. The torches lining the courtyard hissed softly as the wind caressed them, sending sparks upward like tiny souls fleeing toward the heavens. The condemned man inhaled, slow and long, tasting the cool air as if it were the last wine the world would ever offer him. And in that breath, something ancient stirred. A presence, a pulse, a vibration that did not belong to the physical world. He felt it ripple through him, first in his chest, then down his arms, then rising again like a tide of warm light. It wasn't fear. It wasn't panic. It was awakening, as though some hidden part of him, long dormant, had been waiting for this precise moment to open its eyes. He closed them briefly, not to escape, but to see deeper. Inside that fleeting darkness, he saw not blackness, but movement shapes made of memory, shimmering threads of emotion, fragments of laughter, tears, and long-forgotten whispers. They drifted like particles, suspended in a golden current. His spirit was loosening, untying itself gently from the body that had carried him through a lifetime of mistakes and miracles. When he lifted his eyelids again, the world looked subtly transformed, more vivid, more intentional, more alive. The execution platform before him no longer appeared merely as wood and rope. It seemed symbolic now, almost ceremonial. Not an ending, but a doorway. A threshold, a place where the visible gave way to the invisible. The guards exchanged glances, nervousness flickering in their eyes. They could feel it to something unspoken in the air, something that made their skin prickle with awareness, even if they didn't understand why. One of them muttered, "He looks like he's somewhere else." He was everywhere else. The executioner stepped forward, his face hidden by a dark hood, a figure designed to erase individuality, to ensure that death was not given a face that could be haunted or hated. But even he moved with hesitation tonight, not because of fear of the condemned, but because the atmosphere felt thick with presence, as if someone or something unseen stood beside the prisoner. The condemned man studied the executioner, not with resentment, not with dread, but with a soft curiosity. Behind that hood was another soul, another story, another piece of the universe playing its role. And strangely, the condemned man felt a hint of compassion for him. "You are only doing what the world has asked of you," he thought, "and soon I will be free in a way neither of us can imagine." The executioner gestured for him to kneel, but before he lowered himself, the condemned man took one last look at the sky. The stars shimmered like distant lanterns, guiding travelers across the unknown, and for a moment he felt them pulling at him, not violently, but gently, like a tide calling the water back to the ocean. He whispered a single word toward the heavens. Soon, when his knees touched the wooden platform, a surge of energy pulsed through harmonic spectre, electric, profound. It was as though the earth itself had recognized his presence, as though the ancient wood absorbed his weight, not with indifference, but with acknowledgement. His hands were bound again, this time more firmly. Yet he didn't resist. Resistance belonged to the world of flesh, acceptance belonged to the world of spirit, and he was already stepping between the two. As the ropes tightened around him, he felt an odd sensation, not suffocating, not restrictive, but grounding, as though the bindings were anchoring his physical form so that his soul could detach more easily. He exhaled slowly. Every breath felt like peeling another layer of himself away. Then came the silence. Not the silence of people holding their breath, not the silence of fear, but a deeper silence, the kind that hums with cosmic resonance, the kind that vibrates between worlds. He felt it settle on his skin like a sacred veil. The executioner lifted the final blade, the moonlight glinting along its edge. A flash of cold brightness cut through the night, a reminder of the physical reality he still occupied. But the condemned man was already drifting, already feeling the pull of another realm whispering his name. And that was when it happened. A memory surfaced unbidden, vivid, alive. He was 6 years old again, running across a sunlit field, arms outstretched, laughing as the wind whipped past him. His father watched from a distance, smiling with the kind of pride that warms a child more deeply than sunlight ever could. His mother called his name from the house, her voice soft and loving, carrying the scent of warm bread and safety. For a moment, he felt like that child again, untouched by pain, untouched by judgment, untouched by the weight of choices. His eyes filled with a quiet ache. Was that innocence still inside him? Had it ever truly left? He felt the answer rise inside him, not as words but as energy. It never left, you only forgot. That realization washed over him with such force that his chest tightened, not in fear, but in recognition. He had spent so much of his life carrying guilt, carrying regret, carrying the belief that he had broken something essential within himself. But standing at the edge of his final moment, he could see the truth. He had never been broken, he had only been human. The executioner's voice cut through the stillness. "Say your final words." But the condemned man shook his head gently, not out of refusal, but because he understood that words were too small for what he felt now. Instead, he lifted his face toward the sky and breathed in the night. And then, softly the guards could barely hear it, he spoke, not to them, but to the universe. "Take me as I am, and let me become what I was meant to be." The words vibrated through him, resonant, ancient, like a prayer spoken not from the mouth, but from the soul. The moment they left his lips, something shifted in the air, something subtle yet immense. A warm curtain encircled him, brushing his skin like the softest hands. A light not visible but felt enfolded behind him like wings opening. A presence enveloped him, comforting, familiar. And then he understood. He wasn't dying alone. The executioner raised the blade, but the condemned man didn't to focus on Italiano. He focused on the sensation building inside his chest, the growing light, the expanding warmth, the feeling of dissolving boundaries. His vision blurred for a moment, not from fear, but from transcendence. The world around him began to change. The torches shimmered like halos. The guards became silhouettes of moving energy. The wooden platform glowed faintly beneath him, and the stars pulsed like living hearts. He felt himself stretching awareness, blooming beyond the cage of the body, reaching outward, upward, inward, all at once. His spirit hovered at the threshold, not yet separated, but no longer confined. One breath more, one heartbeat more. He felt the universe inhale with him. The blade gleamed above, and in that suspended moment between the lifting of the weapon and its descent, he stepped into complete surrender. Not surrender to death. Surrender to truth. Surrender to the luminous space where fear dissolves and the soul remembers its origin. He closed his eyes. The world became silent, and he whispered into the darkness, "I am ready." In that instant, in that sliver of time too brief to measure yet vast enough to transform, the veil began to dissolve. His body trembled lightly. His spirit expanded. His consciousness drifted toward something unnameable, something radiant, something eternal. The moment of separation was close. Closer than breath, closer than heartbeat, closer than thought. He felt himself becoming less and more at the same time, less matter, more energy, less fear, more truth, less self, more universe. The threshold awaited. He stepped toward it, and the world held its breath. The moment hung in the air like a suspended breath, stretched so thin it seemed as if the world itself might tear along its edges. The blade had not yet fallen, but something inside the condemned man shifted, an internal unfolding, a soft untying of invisible threads that had held his spirit tightly within the confines of flesh for a lifetime. He felt it first in his chest, a gentle pressure, not painful, but illuminating, as if a lantern had been lit behind his ribs, as if some long-forgotten part of him had awakened with a whisper. The courtyard around him seemed to dim, though the torches still burned. Rather, it was his perception that changed, his focus drawing inward, into a realm where sound was muted and movement slowed. The external world blurred at the edges, like a painting losing detail, while the internal world sharpened with extraordinary clarity. He sensed his soul loosening, not leaving, not escaping, but loosening like a bird unwrapping its wings after a long confinement. The executioner's hands tightened around the weapon, but the condemned man hardly noticed now. The physical realm felt distant, secondary, like the echo of a dream he had already begun to outgrow. He inhaled deeply, and with that breath, the universe exhaled. Everything started to vibrate, not visibly, but energetically. The ground beneath him hummed like a living creature, ancient and wise. The air around his skin tingled as though filled with gentle electric currents. Even the darkness behind his eyelids pulsed with soft waves of light. It wasn't frightening. It was familiar, as if he had felt this before, long before he was born, long before he had a name, long before he became a man shaped by choices and consequences. It felt like the moment before entry into the world, a sensation buried in the deepest layers of his essence. He was returning to the source he had forgotten, returning to the place where souls were shaped and dreams were chosen, returning to the truth behind the illusion of time. His lips parted slightly as he whispered, "I remember." He didn't know what he remembered, not consciously, but his soul knew and it flooded him with emotion, so rich, so ancient, so intensely gentle, that tears rolled down his cheeks without force. The executioner paused for a second. A flicker of hesitation crossed his posture. He could sense something unusual, though he couldn't explain it. The guards stiffened, sensing the same invisible shift, though none of them dared speak. The condemned man felt their unease, like faint ripples in the background. But it no longer mattered. Their fear, their confusion, their roles in this world, they all belonged to a reality he was leaving behind. His spirit was stepping forward, his body was lagging behind. The separation had begun. Then came the warmth. A wave of heat flowed through him, not physical warmth, but spiritual warmth, like standing near a fire that burned without consuming. It moved from the center of his chest outward, filling his limbs, brightening the space behind his closed eyes. It felt like being held, like being recognized, like being welcomed home. He sensed presences around him, soft, luminous, loving, not spirits with faces or forms, but beings made of pure vibration. They hovered just beyond his physical senses, yet his soul could feel them as clearly as one feels the sun on the skin. He didn't know if they were ancestors, guides, or fragments of his own eternal consciousness. He didn't need to know. All that mattered was that he wasn't alone. He never had been. The realization warmed him from within, dissolving the last remnants of fear he might have carried. He let his shoulders relax, let his breath flow freely, let his soul rise like smoke from sacred incense. "I'm not afraid," he whispered, not to the executioner, not to the guards, but to the universe listening. The words vibrated through him, and the luminous presences around him seemed to respond with a subtle shift of energy, like a nod, like approval, like love. Suddenly, the world sharpened again, but only for a moment. He became acutely aware of the cold wooden platform beneath him, of the rope pressing against his skin, of the distant murmur of the crowd gathered beyond the courtyard walls. He could even hear a guard swallow, the tiny sound amplified in the vast silence. It was as if the universe wanted him to feel everything one last time, to taste the physical world in its entirety before releasing it, to remember the texture of existence, to honor it, to let it go with gratitude. So he let himself feel. He felt the chill of the night air. He felt the faint sting, where the ropes rubbed against him. He felt the heaviness of his own heartbeat. He felt the rough surface beneath his knees. He felt the tremor in his fingers, and he whispered, "Thank you." The words had no audience, but they had purpose. "Thank you for the body that carried me. Thank you for the breath that sustained me. Thank you for the pain that shaped me. Thank you for the love that softened me. Thank you for the journey, imperfect but sacred." As the gratitude flowed through him, the final thread tethering him to fear snapped gently. He was free inside himself. He lifted his head slightly, letting his gaze follow the night sky again. The stars looked closer than before, larger, brighter, more alive. They pulsed like hearts, like lanterns, like memories of a place beyond human understanding. A sudden awareness struck him. They're not distant. Home. The recognition hit him with overwhelming tenderness. Home. Not the house where his mother once tucked him into bed. Not the village where he grew into a man. Not the earth he was now kneeling upon. Home was the luminous expanse above him. Home was the realm of pure vibration. Home was the source of every soul. He felt an ache spread through him, not painful, but yearning, a deep soul-level longing to return, to dissolve back into the infinite, to become light again. A tear rolled down his cheek, not from sorrow, but from remembrance. "I'm coming back," he whispered to the stars, "to where I began as His eye did." He felt the invisible presences lean closer, their energy wrapping around him like a warm embrace. Then something extraordinary happened. His perception shifted completely, not gradually, but in a sudden, profound expansion. He felt himself stretching beyond his physical form, like light spilling from a lantern. His awareness grew larger, wider, deeper. He could sense the thoughts of the guards, not their actual thoughts, but the emotional vibrations underneath them. Fear, discomfort, confusion. He could feel the executioner's heartbeat, steady but strained. He could feel the weight of centuries pressing against the walls around him. He could feel the night wind, as though it moved through him rather than around him. For a moment, he wasn't a man. He was awareness. He was perception. He was energy flowing between worlds. His body still knelt on the platform, but he no longer fully inhabited it. He hovered inside himself, observing the scene with a kind of divine detachment. "So this is what it feels like," he thought, "to stand at the doorway between worlds." And the universe whispered back, not in words, but in a vibration so deep and so loving it made his entire being tremble. "You are almost home." The executioner raised the blade higher, but the condemned man saw it differently now, not a weapon, not a threat, but a key, a tool that would unlock the final separation between body and soul. He felt no anger toward it, no fear of Italiano, no resentment, only acceptance, only clarity, only peace. The blade glinted in the moonlight, and he felt the luminous presences around him expand, as though preparing to guide him through the transition. Ebredet in he, breathe, and then something remarkable happened. He saw his life, not as a sequence of events, not as memories, but as energy, colorful, shifting currents of emotion and intention. Every choice, every mistake, every moment of love shimmered before him like fragments of a stained glass window illuminated from within. He felt no shame, no regret, no judgment, only understanding, only compassion, only truth. His life had been imperfect, yes, but it had been real, and that made it sacred. The final vibration shook through him, a sense of release, a sense of rising, a sense of becoming more and less at once. The presences drew closer. The stars pulsed. The universe inhaled again, and he felt his soul reach the edge, the very border of existence, the threshold between breath and silence, between heartbeat and stillness, between body and eternity. He whispered, "One last time. I am ready." The blade began its descent, and in that infinitesimal moment, that sliver of reality, too brief for time, too sacred for fear, he stepped toward the light. For a moment that did not belong to time, the entire world seemed to stop. Not a pause, not a hesitation, but a suspension like the universe had drawn in one long, eternal breath and refused to let it go. The blade sliced through the air, but to the condemned man, it no longer sounded like metal cutting space. Instead, it felt like a vibration deep, resonant, almost musical, a final note in the symphony of his earthly existence. And then, everything shifted. The moment of impact arrived, but he didn't feel it as pain, not as fear, not as shock. He felt it as release. A warmth flooded him, powerful, immediate, enveloping. A rush of energy surged upward like a tide breaking free from the seabed, lifting him out of the confines of flesh. It wasn't gentle, yet it wasn't violent. It was natural. It was right. It was inevitable. For the first time, he understood death not as an ending, but as an unfolding. His body slumped forward, but his consciousness did not fall with it. It rose. It expanded. It ascended. It transcended. He felt himself separating cleanly, completely from the vessel that had carried him across a lifetime of joy and sorrow. The physical form dropped away like old clothing, irrelevant to the luminous presence he was becoming. There was no darkness, no void, no silence, only light, only vibration, only truth. He floated above the scene without effort. His perspective widened effortlessly. He saw the courtyard, the torches flickering, the crowd murmuring beyond the stone walls. He saw the guards stepping back in shock, unable to understand the heaviness in the air. He saw his body still, quiet, empty. But he did not feel grief at the sight. He felt liberation. He felt gratitude. He felt recognition. The body had been his home, but it was not him. It was a tool, a temporary garment, a fragile container for something far more expansive. He drifted higher, and the world below seemed softer, dimmer, less solid. Colors dissolved into vibrations, shapes into waves of energy, sound blurred into frequency, matter became mist. He realized he was seeing the physical world through the eyes of the solar vision, unfiltered by fear or attachment, and it was beautiful, not because it was perfect, but because it was fleeting, because it was fragile, because it was part of the grand dance between birth and return. He understood now what he could never have understood before. Life was never meant to be held. It was meant to be experienced and released. Then he felt them. The presences, the luminous beings who had hovered near him during his final moments now grew clearer shapes, made of light, of resonance, of pure awareness. They had no faces, yet he recognized them instinctively. They had no voices, yet he heard them in every part of himself. Their energy wrapped around him like an embrace, warm, ancient, familiar. He knew them. He had always known them. They had been with him before his birth. They had guided him through moments of despair and grace. They had whispered to him through intuition, through dreams, through sudden clarity. and now they welcomed him home. One of the presences drew closer, its light expanding, shimmering, pulsating with compassion. Without words, it conveyed a message. You are safe. You are free. Go, me, with us. A wave of emotion surged through him, a blend of relief, joy, and an indescribable sense of belonging. His spirit glowed brighter in response. Aligning with their frequency, he allowed himself to drift toward them. The courtyard faded volutes, cold stone, its torches, its shadows, the bodies, the faces, the noise, they were like echoes dissolving into silence. He rose beyond the walls, beyond the rooftops, beyond the clouds, and the higher he ascended, the less the physical world mattered, not because it was meaningless, but because he was outgrowing it. Like a butterfly emerging from a cocoon. Then the transition deepened. A vast expanse unfolded before him, an infinite field of shimmering light, shifting in waves like a celestial ocean. Colors unknown to human eyes rippled across it, blending, separating, merging again in patterns that felt like breathing. He felt his essence expanding even further, his consciousness unfolding like a flower under eternal sunlight. His memories rose around him not as burdens, but as luminous threads weaving themselves into a tapestry. He saw his childhood, his laughter, his joys, his mistakes, his regrets, his small acts of kindness, his quiet moments of grief. He watched it all without judgment, without shame. Wito, fear? The presences around him reflected back only compassion, as though every moment of his life, every stumble, every triumph was worthy of recognition. He realized something profound. Nothing had been wasted. Not a single tear, not a single breath, not a single choice. It had all been part of the path, part of the lesson, part of the return. He felt humbled, seen, understood in a way no earthly connection had ever offered. And he whispered, with the essence of a soul stripped bare, I am ready to continue. As the words resonated, a pathway of light opened before him, soft, glowing, infinite. It extended into a horizon that felt more like an invitation than a destination. The presences aligned beside him, their energy humming in harmony with his own. He took a step forward, not a step of feet, but of essence. And as he did, he felt all heaviness dissolve, fear, guilt, sorrow, confusion. They melted like morning frost under the rising sun. All that remained was clarity, peace, truth, light. The universe spoke to him, then not in a voice, but in a vibration that filled every part of his being. You are returning to the source. You are returning to yourself. He felt tears of light flow through him. Not sadness, not joy, something deeper. Homecoming, he moved forward, becoming more radiant with each step. His consciousness blended with the pathway, merging with the luminous currents around him. The earthly world vanished behind him like the last echo of a fading dream. He did not look back. There was no need. He had lived. He had surrendered. He had transcended. And in the infinite expanse, where silence becomes light, where vibration becomes truth, where the soul remembers its origin, the condemned man dissolved into pure being, not lost, not erased, not forgotten, transformed, expanded, returned. He became part of the luminous ocean, part of the eternal awareness, part of the divine rhythm that pulses through every star, every breath, every life. He became one with the source, one with the cosmos, one with all that ever was and all that ever will be. His journey had ended. His existence had only just begun.